Hey, hey, hey. I would like to talk to you about history. I think it's relatable to the current events that are going on at the moment, although it's not as serious now. Long before the days of dirty bombs in the hands of terrorists, or chemical warfare, or social distancing, there was simply the Great Plague. Great as in size, not because it was awesome. It was also called the Black Death, the bubonic plague, and it was one of evolution's primary thinning mechanisms from the late Middle Ages. The symptoms included a high fever, chills, a headache, exhaustion, a skin rash, and its namesake buboes were the hideously enlarged lymph nodes in the neck, the groin, and the armpit. Without treatment, half the people infected would die. With treatment, 10% would die. But it did give us the song Ring Around the Rosies, Pockets Full of Posies, Ashes, Ashes, They All Fall Down. Yeah, not a good trade-off. For well over a millennium, after traveling all over the world, the plague decided to settle down in Europe and make itself at home. Now this went on to create mayhem and strife for a couple centuries. But the way the plague actually arrived in Europe is the result of one of the earliest instances of biological warfare on record. The invading Mongol horde began launching infested bodies over the wall into Kaffa, present-day Crimea. And the strategy was a stunning success. Although the collateral damage was, extraordinary. As the losing side evacuated the city, they took the plague with them. So the Black Death reached Genoa in the summer of 1347, because Genoa functioned as an epicenter, a great place to retreat to. It also linked to the mainland through Liguria into northern Italy. So you can see where that goes. One can only hope that the city was really, really worth it, because starting in 1347, for the next 20 years, the epidemic, it killed over 25 million people, over a quarter of the population of Europe. Bubonic plague is transferred through the blood. The flea-infested populace and the accompanying population of flea-infested rats transferred the disease from these refugees to their happy new neighbors in France, Africa, Prussia, Britain, Norway, Italy, Russia, and it spread completely across Europe. The death toll mounted to unbelievable levels, and it showed a callous disregard for class distinctions, for wealth, or even religious affiliation. French bishops and Spanish kings died as easily as serfs in the working class. Now, to be fair, the working class were more heavily impacted due to closer association with fleas. But on the bright side, now, not super glowing white hot bright, but on the positive end of shit that sucks, it did allow workers to start demanding better wages and better working conditions, because a large amount of the labor pool came down with a sudden case of dead. And supply and demand and iron law of wages will always be facts. No matter how unpopular they may get, it's the reality of the way the world is. Now, the major epidemic had largely receded by the time 2 decades had passed, but it never quite did fully go away. There were scattered outbreaks here and there for the next few centuries, but the plague resurged for one last jump scare, one big disaster, like a villain in a horror movie. 1665, London. Now, the outbreak gets a lot of attention because, well, it killed a lot of people, but also because it was extraordinarily well documented. Now, the Great Plague of London actually started as a devastating outbreak in Holland. But in the spring of 1665, it hit Britain. And it hit Britain with a vengeance. Now, it started by killing off poor people. So, naturally, the monarchy ignored it. But as the deaths started to climb the economic ladder, suddenly there was a problem. So what was the brave, brilliant strategy for dealing with this problem? Run away! Run away! See, I wish I had coconuts. The people who fled were naturally the wealthy, the noble, and that just happened to consist of the government, law enforcement, doctors. Yeah, they hightailed it out of town rather than stay and try to help the people that they were obligated to help. That's totally not familiar now, right? Imagine all the people. Eventually, people did figure out that fleas were the cause. But unfortunately, this was after they decided the plague was being spread by cats and dogs. So the mayor of London ordered the mass execution of millions of good boys and kitties. And the plague accelerated. Probably because the mayor of London's brilliant strategy allowed rats, the actual culprit, to spread freely with the absence of their most dangerous predator, cats. So when spring stretched into the summer, the doctors, the government officials, the wealthy, all safely ensconced in their country estates, started forcible quarantines. So when one victim surfaced in an area, it was immediately quarantined. Now, this approach did help slow the spread of the disease to specific areas. It also resulted in mass deaths, thousands of additional dead, seeing as the quarantine rules didn't include a way to feed the hungry. And of course, there were armed guards there to keep the poor and the sick quarantined while they ignored the rats that were actually spreading the disease. Daniel Defoe, who would become famous for writing Robinson Crusoe, penned a more or less semi-fictional history of the London Plague. Now, he reconstructed it from eyewitness accounts and his own experience of an outbreak in France. It is, unfortunately, written in that prose that makes Defoe a favorite of sadistic high school English teachers. It does provide some useful insight into conditions that London had at the time. So if you will please bear with me while I attempt to read this. And I will try to do it without the snooty British accent. I went all the first part of the time freely about the streets, though not so freely as to run myself into apparent danger, except when they dug the great pit in the churchyard of our parish of Aldgate. A terrible pit it was, and I could not resist my curiosity to go and see it. As near as I may judge, it was about 40 feet in length, and 15 or 16 feet broad, and at the time I first looked at it, about 9 feet deep, but it was said that they dug it near 20 feet deep afterward in one part of it, till they could go no deeper for the water. for they had, it seems, dug several large pits before this. Into these pits they had put perhaps 50 or 60 bodies each. Then they made larger holes wherein they buried all that the cart brought in a week, which by the middle to the end of August came from 200 to 400 a week. At the beginning of September, the plague, raging in a dreadful manner, had the number of burials in our parish increasing to more than was ever buried in any parish about London of no larger extent. They ordered this dreadful gulf to be dug, for such it was, rather than a pit. They had supposed this pit would have supplied them for a month or more when they dug it, and some blamed the churchwardens for suffering such a frightful thing, telling them they were making preparations to bury the whole parish and the like. But time made it appear the churchwardens knew the condition of the parish better than they did. For the pit being finished on the 4th of September, I think, they began to bury it on the 6th, and by the 20th, which was just 2 weeks, they had thrown into it 1,114 bodies. When they were obliged to fill it up, the bodies being then come to lie within 6 feet of the surface. The Great Plague of London ended when the fleas started to die in the fall and winter, which was their seasonal habit. All in all, more than 70,000 people died, 15% of the population of London. Now, with increased sanitary conditions, the threat of the plague was reduced greatly. But it was the invention of antibiotics in the 20th century that really just put the plague in history books. There was an outbreak in '94 in India, but despite mass panic and tens of thousands of infections, there were only 56 deaths. So the next time your enemy throws a plague-ridden corpse into your yard, you can cheerfully laugh it off. Skip down to the corner drugstore, get some tetracycline or some Caflexin, and know that you will be fine. Just be sure to watch out for those smallpox blankets. Oh yeah, and bat soup. Those are real killers. Alright, I would like to thank you for taking the time to watch my boring-ass video. I do apologize, I was probably a bit lispy, and may have been hard to understand, having a dental issue, and I can't exactly get out and go see the dentist at the moment. Now, hopefully Randall here is not too distracting, but he's been a bit jealous because Panda gets all the attention. You know, I would love to say that quarantine has me so lonely that I'm talking to my stuffed animals, but truth be told, I have no friends. So, like and subscribe, and as always, yeah, do that.